Greetings aspirants. Welcome to Narayana IAS. In this session of daily news analysis, we have picked up certain important articles from The Hindu as well as Indian Express. These are the list of articles that we have picked up. The first article is from The Hindu, page number 1, which is referring to the Kheda Flogging issue, over which the Supreme Court has said that it's a case of police atrocity. We will look into the constitutional issues that are arising out of this particular topic. Second issue is again from The Hindu, page number 9, which is referring to the need to overhaul a semiconductor scheme. The third issue is from the Indian Express from page number 10, which is referring to the Indo-France strategic partnership. The fourth issue is again from the Indian Express from economy part from page number 15, which is referring to certain patterns that are emerging pertaining to the direct taxes. The fifth and final issue that I have picked up is the announcement of Bharat Ratna for the socialist icon, who was erstwhile Chief Minister of the state of Bihar, whose name is Karpuri Thakur, and we will be looking into the dynamic aspects of this announcement, right from the politics of identity which lead to certain social cleavages and the conflict that arises because of social cleavages within the politics of identity. Before moving ahead, if you like this initiative, please like, share and comment on this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We shall move to the first article. The article is Kheda Flogging is a case of police atrocity, as said by the Supreme Court. How this article is significant for the UPSC examination? Keep in mind that torture, whenever occurs, by definition, it goes against the fundamental principle in the Constitution, which is guarantee to one's right to life and liberty. This article is significant for mains examination from GS2 point of view, where the question can be from related constitutional provisions or even from the improvements that has to be made from the governance perspective. Look at this previous year question. This question has been asked in 2019. What do you understand by probity in governance? Based on your understanding of the term, suggest measures for ensuring probity in government. A 150-word question. Now we shall look at the context for this particular topic. In 2022, as you note here, there was an incident in Gujarat where there was a cultural event which was being held. During this cultural event, few men belonging to some other religion have caused ruckus in this particular event, and allegedly they were trying to obstruct that particular event. And police have caught hold of them, and these individuals were subjected to what is referred to as flogging, where you are whipping them in the public. It is this which has raked up a hell lot of constitutional issues. Keep in mind, there is a definition available with respect to what is referred to as torture. This definition is hailing from the UN Convention for Human Rights and the convention that has been signed against torture in 1997, which is again sponsored by the UN. India, even though is a signatory to this particular convention, we have not yet ratified this particular convention. What is the definition given for torture in this particular convention? It is very simple. It says that if an individual is subjected to infliction of suffering or pain, either in terms of mental pain or in terms of physical pain, which is intentional. I repeat, such suffering which has been inflicted is intentional. Then it is referred to as torture. This might be by an private individual, or this can also be by an agency belonging to state, such as the police in this particular case. If there is an element of torture, then there has to be the consequence in terms of certain remedy which has to be available. That remedy either has to be in the form of compensation or in the form of penalty or punishment. What we have in our law is that there is no possibility of penalty, there is no possibility of punishment in case this is done by the state or its agency, which is what in principle is referred to as principle of sovereign immunity. I repeat, it is referred to as principle of sovereign immunity. This principle is something similar to what sort of principles we had somewhere back in the medieval world, where we had this notion of king can do no wrong. Similar to that, the principle of sovereign immunity says that the agencies which belong to state and the state itself must be subjected to such immunity. So this principle of sovereign immunity, as it is applied, we don't have any definition that is applicable to the torture that has been inflicted by the state or its agency. Hence, it is straightaway in violation of Article 21, where in spite of the fact that Supreme Court has stated that any act of torture would be going against this right which has been guaranteed under Article 21. Second, it is also violative of Article 14 because of the fact that the general principle of equality would be subjected to the violation in terms of the status, and the status of the individual who is undergoing torture would be diminished in terms of its relationship with other such individuals we have in society. So, given these constitutional issues, we also have other substantial issues which are involved. One such substantial issue is how to make this particular state or its agency which subjects the individuals to such an element of torture accountable. As we see in this particular case, it leads to what is referred to as human rights violation. Even though we are signatory to, as I said, the Convention Against Torture, we have not ratified it. There is no clarity as to why we have not ratified it, in spite of the fact that earlier there was an attempt to pass a legislation in favor of such ratification. Second, there is also a chance of loss of public trust over the governance institutions. Third, this would also have an impact on communal relations, because in general we observe that those who are in minority in the majority-minority relationship would be subjected to such an element of torture. Fourth, we also see that there is procedural lapse in the sense that the law enforcement agencies, whenever they see a violation or alleged violation of the law, the immediate procedure would be to make sure that the individual is subjected to what is referred to as the defined procedure that is set in the Constitution. This individual must be produced before the judge of a court, and then an FIR must be registered, and then alone there can be the possibility of what is referred to as inquiry. Where in this particular issue all these are absent, the procedural justice has been clearly violated and the individual has been subjected to flogging. Moving ahead, what sort of judicial precedents we have against all these possible violations? One, in this case of D.K. Basu versus State of West Bengal in 1996, the Supreme Court has laid down certain guidelines to prevent such violence. It might be custodial violence. However, this is also applicable to any such violence which is referred to as torture and the possible police abuse. In this, it said that any form of violence which is inhuman or any form of application of force which is inhuman is considered a violation of Article 21, including the procedural lapses. This leads to the violation of Article 21. Second, there has to be what is referred to as a fair treatment. The fairness alone ultimately leads to what is referred to as availability of justice, access to justice. Fairness begins with the notion of equality, and it acts as a bridge between equality and justice. Third, there has to be, in fact, procedurally mandatory recording of the fact of arrest. This will happen only when the procedure that is laid down is followed. There are other such judicial precedents we have in order to address this issue. For example, in Prakash Singh case in 2006, the Supreme Court said that implementation of structural changes must be made possible. Second, in Sheila Barse case in 1983, Supreme Court has emphasized the protection of rights for women in police custody. And in this case of PUCL versus State of Maharashtra in 2014, it said that there has to be impartiality and transparent inquiries into custodial deaths, which acknowledge that the custodial deaths were happening due to what is referred to as plausible torture. Fourth, in this case of Ram Sagar Yadav in 1985, the coercion by the police to extract confessions from the individuals who have allegedly committed certain offence is unconstitutional, because this goes against the notion of choice as part of fundamental right to liberty as guaranteed in Article 21. And in the fifth case, which is referred to as Kishore Singh Ravinder Dev case in 2019, Supreme Court said that proper investigation procedures and the obligation of the police to follow the due process of law is clearly laid down. All these judicial precedents point to the fact that there is a level of void because of the absence of law against the torture, even though we are signatory to Convention Against Torture, and hence the immediate requirement would be to pass such law and make the state and the state agencies accountable to that law without following still that medieval notion of principle of sovereign immunity. Moving to the next article, we look into this article published in The Hindu. The need to overhaul a semiconductor scheme. The semiconductor DLI scheme, that is design linked incentive scheme, is important for preliminary examination. This is significant from the policies that we make up in order to encourage certain developments in science and technology. What is the context? The government has launched the semiconductor design linked incentive scheme, and this design linked incentive scheme had a target of approving nearly 100 startups in next 5 years. However, we see that only 7 startups have been approved so far, number 1. And number 2, it is also a part of $10 billion Semicon India program. So the author says that till now we could achieve only mixed results, and as the review is pending, what are the possibilities in which the scheme can be bettered? What are the objectives? Remember that we need to reduce the import dependence of the chips, which are prime most important requirements in number of industries, including automobile industry. Second, we have to integrate ourselves with the global supply chain. There is no choice. And third, we want to establish India as a semiconductor hub of the world. Given the fact that China is slowing down, given the fact that there is China plus one strategy being followed by number of industries, number of corporates, this can be a good opportunity. And in order to seize this opportunity, we have to also have certain focus upon what is referred to as indigenization. Indigenization of this manufacturing must occur. Second, we must hence facilitate domestic companies, startups from India, and also micro, small and medium enterprises of Indian origin must also be promoted, which are significant for creating gainful employment. On the other hand, we must also have access to the semiconductor design infrastructure for these startups and these MSMEs. It is in this particular context the semiconductor DLI policy has been announced. Having said this, now we are trying to see a scenario wherein we are prioritizing upon the design ecosystem, not just the manufacturing of the chips in India, but in its entirety, the entire value chain has to be prioritized. This is what design ecosystem means. So, the less capital intensive, such focus on prioritizing design ecosystem emerging from the fact that it is less capital intensive compared to the foundry and assembly stages. Second, we can also establish forward linkages to a growing fabrication and assembly industry in India, including, as we were mentioning earlier, the automobile industry. The second rationale for prioritizing such design ecosystem is that we can also establish forward linkages to a growing fabrication and assembly industry in India, focusing upon these design aspect of entire semiconductor manufacturing in India. What are the challenges that we have? The first challenges is startup face what is referred to as uptake challenges. The technological requirement that this industry has and the possibility of failure or the eventual failure of such a startup will be very, very high. Second, there are restrictions in terms of accessing the funds, and there are also certain fund compliance requirements. This is acting as a hindrance. Third, whatever the incentives as on today we have, it seems the corporates also mention this, that it is inadequate that we have whatever we have in India. Third, there is also institutional dilemma and conflict of interest, in the sense that if I promote the compulsory manufacturing and design of semiconductors in India, it might create a situation which is not conducive for corporates to come into India and invest here. It is this conflict of interest, and hence the emerging institutional dilemma are occurring as challenges. What can be done with regard to this? Remember, probably this scheme can be revised in such a way that it can have a revised focus towards asking these companies to have registration within India. This can probably act as a middle path in this particular concern of challenges that we have. Second, the role of implementing agency must also be expanded in such a way that not only the issue of foundry and assembly, but also we must collaborate with industries. Second, we must also have a funding pattern that is available. Third, there must also be the possibility of mentorship. All these put together alone, where the implementing agency implementing all these, the thriving design and manufacturing of semiconductor industry would be possible. Third, the policy must also be recalibrated in such a way that design is receiving the incentive structure that the government proposes. All these put together, this can transform the face of semiconductor industry in India. Moving to the next article, we will discuss this challenge for Modi, Macron. Even though the title is simple, it is trying to delve upon some of the very challenging and complex issues that the globe is facing. This article is significant from the Indo-French relations and its dynamics point of view from the GS paper 2 relating to international relations. Look at this previous year question. The time has come for India and Japan to build a strong contemporary relationship, one involving global and strategic partnership that will have a great significance for Asia and the world as a whole. Comment. On the similar lines, even the India-France relationship as of now is being looked upon. What is the context in which we are discussing this particular topic? India initially extended invitation to the American President Joe Biden, who expressed his inability to attend the Republic Day celebrations on January 26th in India. Alternatively, the invitation has been extended to the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and he has readily accepted this invitation. Remember that any invitation to any political leadership on this particular day of Republic Day would signify the nature of relationship that has already emerged. Generally, it would be a very strong strategic partnership that you will be seeing amongst both of these nations. 1. 2, we must also keep in mind that a Republic Day is celebrated in order to express that the Constitution has been enacted and is functioning with higher order or degree of effectiveness. And when you are doing it, you are also doing it in order to express your full sovereignty to the external world. It is this particular aspect which is considered when we are inviting a political leadership to attend the Republic Day celebrations. And in order to protect such sovereignty, we also exhibit our military might along with the political might. It's an expression of both of these. Now look at the nature of Indo-France relationship that has been brought into focus because of this invitation that we have extended to Emmanuel Macron. Remember that India in her foreign policy follows what is referred to as the approach of concentric circles. It is referred to as approach of concentric circles. What does it mean? What you see is on the basis of certain fundamental principles or laws or ideas that govern the relationships, we have a kind of relationship that revolves around these particular principles with respect to some of the nation states. For example, with respect to South Asia and all of our neighborhood, what you see is the historic relationships that we had and the cultural ties that we have in order to establish the relationship, and also whatever the nature of what is referred to as geographic proximity that we have. All these factors would be acting as what is referred to as axis, and around this axis alone all these relationships would be built. So this concentric circles approach gives you the clarity as to what is the axis around which we can have what is referred to as better international relations. Similarly, with respect to the permanent members of United Nations Security Council, which we refer to as P5, there are two fundamental principles that are ideas that we have established in order to establish these relationships. Again, establishing another concentric circle with its own axis. That axis is what is referred to as strategic autonomy, and multilateralism. These two are acting as axis in order to establish relationship with P5 countries. Hence, this is also applicable to and largely applicable to France as a friendly and strategically important nation. What does the expression strategic autonomy mean? Strategic autonomy for any particular nation state is that the nation state is able to pursue her national interest. The nation state is able to pursue her national interest by following what is referred to as independent foreign policy without being dependent on some other nation or powerful nation for the execution of her foreign policy. When both of these are there, it means that you are not following any whims and fancies that are expressed by any particular powerful nation as part of what is referred to as unilateralism. So, this national interest being pursued by adhering to what is referred to as independent foreign policy, you are saying that you are not constrained by any other nation state. Second, when you refer to multilateralism, you are significantly referring to a possibility in the international order. That possibility is, you are saying that there are certain rules and these rules are framed by what is referred to as international law, and there are institutions which govern these international law in order to make sure that entire global order is functioning according to this international law, hence establishing an orderly and rule-bound international order. All these three, when they occur, we refer to it as multilateralism, because as a consequence of this, all the group of nations who are part of this rule-bound order and the institutions which are governing these rules are becoming part and parcel of such rules and institutions. Hence, the participation of all the nation states is there. Hence, we refer to this as multilateralism. This can be applicable to politics, this is applicable to culture, this is also applicable to economy. All the dimensions or aspects of any particular life, international life, can be governed by this aspect of multilateralism. This significantly goes against this notion of unilateralism, where a powerful nation is expressing her whims and fancies in place of these rule-bound, international law-dependent institutions governed what is referred to as multilateralism that is possible. Now, on the basis of these two fundamental ideas as basis for the strategic partnership or the basis for mutual partnership, we have established strong relationship based on our shared history. This relationship goes back to the era of the French East Indian Company and her presence in Indian subcontinent, where it had very strong relationship with particularly the state of Mysore as a regional kingdom within this particular part of the territory. This relationship has extended in such a way that this has far-reaching implications immediately after independence. In 1947, France was one of the first nations to establish this relationship with India. On the other hand, this has been elevated to what is referred to as strategic partnership on the basis of the nature of relationship that has been continued in 1998. For example, whenever India had any requirement as to the space cooperation, for example, France supplied what is referred to as Ariane rocket in order to place our satellites in the space. So, this relationship is not just limited to culture, not just limited to economy, it has been extending towards space and defense. And all this extended partnership has led to the emergence of what is referred to as strategic partnership in 1998. After the emergence of strategic partnership, there are regular exchanges and regular interactions at the highest level, at the summit level, which includes the heads of the government or the heads of the state. Third, this strategic partnership is also significant from the fact that France has clearly expressed her natural support to the claim of India's membership in the United Nations Security Council, granting her permanent status within this particular organ. Fourth, you can also see this strategic partnership playing a significant role post this nuclear test that India has conducted. Post this nuclear test, India has been subjected to imposition of certain sanctions by other P4 members, including Russia. However, this France supported India in terms of deflecting the attention of these P4 nations from the sanctions that have been imposed on India. Eventually, as you see, post 2003, this has been translated into a nuclear deal between India and United States of America, and the immediate ramification of this nuclear deal is that France became the first nation state to sign the civilian nuclear deal with India, taking this strategic partnership to the next level in terms of mutual trust. And this has been elevated to certain higher level of higher degree of strategic partnership through this notion of Horizon 2047. Recently, we know that we have celebrated 25 years of strategic partnership between India and France, and we have also celebrated 75 years of establishing mutual relationship between India and France. We now have certain vision map in order to take this relationship to the higher level, expanding the horizon of the cooperation that is possible, which is including the defense partnership that we have in terms of transfer of critical technology, either to manufacturing of the Scorpion submarines or the manufacturing of the fighter aircraft in India, including the ready-made purchase of the Rafale marine aircraft that we have ventured upon. So this expanded to the space cooperation between ISRO and France National Space Agency, including some other cultural and people-to-people contacts. Given this relationship, what we have is, in the scenario of international situation, there are certain challenges. These challenges are emerging from the Europe itself, particularly the Central Europe. What you see here is the invasion or the so-called conflict between Russia and Ukraine, in which Russia and Ukraine are not toning down their aggressive stance. And this has created what is referred to as a void in terms of security order within Central Europe. Earlier, in the post-Cold War scenario, you had the scenario of fall of Soviet Union, by which it means that it is fall of communist bloc, by which it means that end of what is referred to as Warsaw Pact. On the other hand, in balance to this Warsaw Pact, you also have the transatlantic cooperation that is possible through NATO led by USA. Given the fall of this particular Warsaw Pact, you have only the treaty which is referred to as the NATO, which is a security group and also a political group. This hence brought up what is referred to as the possibility of unilateralism within the security architecture of Europe without having any counterbalance to this particular security architecture that has emerged. It is this void which has created a conflicting situation within Central Europe. You know that Western Europe and Russia have this bridge of certain Central European nations, including Ukraine. It is this bridge which has to be brought into the zone of peace, which is a Herculean challenge, given the fact that Russia, even though claims herself as democracy, is showing these tendencies of imperialism. This is the first thing. Second thing, with respect to the present conflict, when NATO says that we are going to give Ukraine the membership in NATO or protect the interests of Ukraine, this conflict is going to persist, which creates further challenges to the security order in Europe. This is the fundamental challenge that Arthur is bringing up. Second, we also have the problem of Middle East crisis, wherein unless and until this is addressed, this will lead to the situation of energy insecurity for the remaining world. This will also lead to further consequential problems because of such energy security crisis. Third, we also see certain uncertainty from American politics emerging. For example, we see that in the primaries, Donald Trump again is emerging as a possible candidate from the Republican Party, bringing up the ideas of conservatism into the global political scene. We know that he is known for this so-called America First policy. As part of this America First policy, he brought up certain challenges to the global order and also the regional order, particularly in Asia and Europe. He is saying that he will withdraw from this North Atlantic Treaty Organization that has been signed as a group post the World War II. This brings up another challenge to the security architecture of Europe. Second, he is also saying from the perspective of India's interest that across the board there will be import tariffs by which our goods will be subjected to certain comparative disadvantage. Third, he is also saying that in spite of relationship being elevated to strategic partnership, he is referring to the give and take mechanism, whereby unless and until we give certain compromises in terms of market access, in terms of certain guarantees that we give, wherein we will be buying or relying upon for USA for our requirements, there will not be any such possibility of meeting our requirements through USA. So this is bringing up a new challenge to the global order. Given this particular aspect, the author is saying that this Horizon 2047, which has been signed, whereby the 100th year of mutual relationship and 50th year of strategic partnership, we want to elevate this to such a level that the security architecture within Europe is established into certain defined architecture, number one. Number two, reform of multilateral institutions such as UN and UN Security Council occurs in such a way that it reflects the global reality. And third, you expand the space, defense and other such cooperation in such a way that it is the global interest and the interest of all the humanity can be met with. It is these three on the ideal scale, on the entire horizon of the global interest, that this relationship is moving forward. Solution has to be in this particular partnership. What must be the way forward? As you clearly see, the security order in Europe is under threat, including the Helsinki Final Act in 1975, which was signed, which has clearly said that there should not be any scope for war in Europe and hence peace must prevail, is subjected to threat. Earlier, it was subjected to threat in Eastern Europe and the ramifications that we had within Eastern Europe. Now, it has been subjected to threat by what is referred to as Russia-Ukraine conflict. Second, they must work together in such a way that there is some deterrence which is created, which is a credible deterrence within this region of Asia, not just in Middle East, but even this can be subjected to the Indo-Pacific situation or the Korean Peninsula crisis, whereby the peace and order in this part of the entire region is brought back. Third, we must also look at this relationship from the perspective of the challenges that are emerging to the sea lanes of communication, which immediately challenge the possibility of free trade and free communication and free movement of people from one part of the nation state to another part of the nation state. Again, in this particular aspect also, as we have already discussed, the Horizon 2047 can be the way forward in terms of addressing these challenges. Moving to the next article, we will discuss this topic of direct tax to GDP ratio rose to 15-year high in financial year 2020-2023. We will discuss this from the perspective of GS paper 3, which is significant from budget point of view. And in this direct tax trends, we will look into what are the implications of these trends pertaining to economy. Look at this previous year question. Distinguish between capital budget and revenue budget. Explain the components of both of these budgets as asked in 2021. As you clearly see that any component of budget can be questioned, simply even direct taxes alone can be asked as a question. You can also see this question, enumerate the indirect taxes which have been subsumed in the GST in India. Also, comment on the revenue implications of the GST introduced in India since July 2017, asked in 2019. What is the context? We clearly see that there is a slowdown in what is referred to as tax buoyancy as notified by CBDT. And we also see that meanwhile, there is an increase in what is referred to as direct tax to GDP ratio. What do they actually infer? When you look at what is referred to as tax GDP ratio or direct tax to GDP ratio, what you are trying to see is the amount of direct taxes which are collected out of the total volume of production that you have, which are the final goods and services which are produced in that particular financial year. As you see this particular ratio, if this ratio is showing an increasing trend, then out of the final goods and services that are produced or out of the entire production in that particular financial year, given their growth, there is a higher possibility of collecting higher revenues in the form of direct taxes. As you clearly know that direct taxes are imposed upon largely the production aspect, because most of it is imposed upon what is referred to as income or wages that the factors of production would earn. Second, you also see this particular definition of tax buoyancy. What does this particular term mean? As you see in this earlier case, when you refer to direct tax to GDP ratio, inherently what you are referring to is the real GDP, meaning whatever the real production that has happened, out of which how much of direct taxes have been collected by the state. When you refer to tax buoyancy, what you are trying to do is you are trying to see the amount of taxes which are collected out of nominal GDP. In general, as you see, if the amount of taxes which are collected out of nominal GDP is showing a ratio of greater than 1, then it is a favorable situation for the government wherein the possibility of higher revenues being collected is there. In this particular scenario, what you see is compared with the previous financial year, there is a reduction in this particular ratio, which means that out of nominal GDP, which we take into consideration in order to see the tax scenario within India and how well you will be able to meet your debt obligation, as we have discussed earlier in one of our DNA video, you see that the slowdown in the direct tax collection will have its own implications when you look at it with comparison to what is referred to as indirect taxes. You clearly know that tax is defined on the basis of two particular parameters. What is the incidence and what is called as impact. If incidence and impact is on the same person, then you refer to as direct tax, and if the incidence and impact is on different persons, then you refer to indirect tax. We clearly know that indirect taxes are generally imposed upon sales and purchases, which means that the consumption process. On the other hand, we also know that nominal GDP comprises of two important components. The one important component is the real GDP in itself, wherein whatever the final goods and services that you have produced in that particular financial year in comparison with the base year is a component that is present, and the second component is the increase in the value of these goods and services that are produced due to what is referred to as inflationary conditions. So the component of inflation which is leading to certain value addition for these final goods and services which are produced in that particular financial year is also existing within this nominal GDP. When you see that there is a ratio between the taxes that are collected in terms of nominal GDP, then it is including this so-called direct tax to GDP ratio because of the presence of what is referred to as real GDP, and it is also including the taxes which are possibly collected because of the variation in this price level in that particular economy. So when you see that the tax buoyancy is showing a slowing trend, it means that the inflation which has led to a rising condition has probably slowed down the production process within that economy and slowed down even the consumption process within that economy. This is another trend that is very clearly visible. Third, we also see that the cost of tax collection has come down. This has a very significant implication not only for the government from the perspective of making tax collection efficient. This is also having another implication from the perspective of Finance Commission. Whenever Finance Commission comes up with what is referred to as the principles governing vertical devolution and the principles governing horizontal distribution, all these principles, when they talk about vertical devolution or horizontal devolution, will be based upon what is referred to as net proceeds. Within this net proceeds, as defined in Article 279, the gross proceeds will be taken, and out of these gross proceeds, the cost of tax collection would be removed. It is in this perspective, whenever you see that there is efficient tax collection that is occurring, then it is good news even for the tax devolution that we see within the economy in any federal setup. We also see that another favorable situation has emerged in this particular financial year, that the ratio between direct taxes and indirect taxes is more than 50%, by which it means that it is a favorable one, making the tax scenario progressive. What it means is, whenever a tax is collected, we know that it is a compulsory exhaustion that the state commits against any citizen, irrespective of any possibility of what is referred to as quid pro quo. So, in return, there is no other social service or outcome that you will have for the payment of these taxes straight away. When you see that direct taxes in comparison with indirect taxes are more, by which it means that both incidence and impact are on the same person, and as you clearly know that direct taxes will have different slabs in terms of incidence and impact, what you see is, if you have higher income, then you will be paying higher taxes, and hence you will be having a favorable situation for the economy in terms of equality and inequality. It is this which we refer to as progressive taxation. This is another aspect. Moreover, what you see in this pattern is there is a kind of skewed distribution in terms of which is the state which is contributing to the higher tax collections in India. If you look at this data, there are 4 administrative divisions, 3 states, 1 union territory or the capital territory, which are contributing nearly 68% of the taxes in India, particularly the direct taxes as we are referring here. The 68% of taxes being collected from 4 administrative divisions shows you how steep disparity that exists in terms of direct tax payments within Indian territory. It is this aspect which has also been brought out by the CBDT analysis. What are the various way outs that we have in order to address these particular concerns? One particular way out is to make sure that there is a direct tax code that has been brought in as recommended by many of the committees. This direct tax code reduces the possibility of change in the direct taxes year on year. Why? As we know that any tax can be imposed only by the authority of law, and hence the Finance Act that we pass as part of budget brings in year on year certain changes within the direct taxes. As these changes are occurring year on year, you are indicating to the production and consumption community that the changes are going to occur and there is no stability with regard to the taxes that are imposed upon the citizenry. What direct tax code does is, for a particular period, it brings in stability and also hence the transparency with regard to the amount of taxation and the incidence and impact of such taxation. This does favorable effect upon the production and consumption activities. This can reduce the skewed nature of tax collections that you are seeing. This can also make the tax collections more and more progressive. Second, as you see here, the immediate effect can also be based on the rationalization of taxes and its governing structure. Rationalization of taxes must bring in what is referred to as lowering of taxes, as you see clearly in any market economy that as the taxes have been lowered to a stable level, which averages at around 14 to 15%, then the tax collections were also high. It is this rationalization that we have to think of. And its governance can also be made more and more transparent in the sense that you reduce the number of possibilities of litigations and disputes. This is another favorable reform that can be thought of in order to change this scenario of skewed tax distribution that you are seeing within Indian economy. Moving to the next article, we'll do this article published in the Indian Express. President Draupadi Murmu has announced that this highest civilian honor of India, Bharat Ratna, has been conferred upon this so-called socialist icon from Bihar named Karpuri Prasad. We know that he has served as Chief Minister for the state of Bihar during the 70s, and this has actually raked up not only the applaud but also some of the concerns that the intelligentsia was expressing. Rather than looking into the details of Bharat Ratna as the highest civilian honor, we will be looking into these fundamental concerns and issues which might underlie this particular topic. We know that this issue is important from the society perspective. And look at this previous year question. Caste system is assuming new identities and associational forms. Hence, caste system cannot be eradicated in India. Comment. This has been asked in 2018. Moving forward, even this issue had such undercurrent. What is the context? We clearly know that this highest civilian honor of India, Bharat Ratna, has been conferred upon Karpuri Thakur posthumously, and we clearly also know that this is being discussed in this context of certain recurrence of socio-political process. For example, in 1990s, we had this issue of Mandir Mandal, and then this Mandir Mandal issue was based on the religious identities and other one is based on the caste identities. This Mandir Mandal issue, which brought up this conflict between religious identity and caste identity within the socio-political processes, is again recurring in the context of construction of Ram temple in Ayodhya. Meanwhile, opposition demanding the socio-economic caste survey across the nation. We know that recently Bihar has completed the socio-economic caste survey, released that report. On the other hand, even the state of Andhra Pradesh recently has constituted an agency to conduct this socio-economic caste census. It is in this particular larger context which is seen as an undercurrent in this conferment of Bharat Ratna to Karpuri Prasad. We will be looking into the dynamics of this particular issue. What are those various constitutional provisions which can be taken into consideration in order to understand moving forward? One such constitutional provision is Article 14. We know that Article 14 guarantees general principle of equality. By guaranteeing this equality, it says any sort of discrimination against any other section of the society would be considered unconstitutional. By doing so, what it is trying to do is, it is trying to establish a society where differences flourish and hence diversity flourish, and the citizen individually and the sections of the society collectively must tolerate and accept such diversity. However, just by saying that all discrimination is invalid, equality cannot be brought into the socio-political systems of Indian society, and hence the Constitution has also provided for certain affirmative actions which are possible. For such affirmative actions, particularly towards those socially and educationally backward sections of the society, we must have certain data. In order to compile that data, in order to ascertain such backwardness, the Constitution has also provided for the Article 340, wherein a commission can be constituted in order to study such backwardness. It is this particular requirement wherein the backwardness is calculated will also come up with the caste data. Second thing. Third thing, the Indian government during 2011 census has also held what is referred to as socio-economic caste census. But after that, no such census was held. This has certain ramification. For example, Supreme Court has said that there is a bar in terms of reservation availability with respect to public employment, and this bar is to the tune of 50% of the posts alone. Given this rigidity, the lower caste demand that this reservation must reflect their population representation in the entire population of India. It is in this context this particular socio-economic caste census is important. Alongside, this caste census is going to give you the presence of number of castes, the demographic dynamics of these castes, and caste-based other data which are possible in order to further the welfare programs and policies of the government. On the other hand, what you also see is when you talk of what is referred to as Mandir Mandal issue, as we have already seen, it is raking up this issue of religious identity versus social identity. This religious identity is on the basis of construction of some temples pertaining to certain religion. On the other hand, we saw the emergence of this on the basis of what is referred to as reservation to certain castes, particularly the other backward castes. Karpuri Prasad would come into picture with respect to this identity politics which were occurring in Indian society. In 70s, when he was Chief Minister of Bihar, he constituted what is referred to as Mungeri Commission, and this Mungeri Commission has identified within other backward castes some of the castes which will be referred to as EBCs, extremely backward classes. And these EBCs were given an additional affirmative action, particularly in the affairs of public services. These EBCs were given certain affirmative action in the matters of services of the state. What you see here, because of the emergence of these two, is this. Earlier, religion has been used as a decolonizing tool. For example, take the case of Kolkata. In Kolkata, pertaining to Hooghly River, firstly East India Company of the British and then the British Crown herself said that this region would be thoroughly for trade activity of the British. On the other hand, during the independence struggle, we started treating this religion as holy, and we wanted to convert this particular place into what is called as a decolonized space. So they were using religion to decolonize these spaces which were used for the colonizational requirements. On the other hand, caste was continuing to be a colonizing tool until our independence. After the independence, once India became a republic, we declared that caste is completely null and void. On the other hand, we also see that this religion-based politics which has emerged in 80s was using religion again in this terminology of decolonization. This terminology of decolonization that was used was not applicable in this sense of that we have already become independent from the colonial rule. On the other hand, with respect to caste, which again was using this as a decolonizing tool, wherein once we identify number of people in a particular caste, we will be in a situation to promote the affirmative action which is suitable for that particular population, was using this affirmative action as a decolonizing tool by identifying their backwardness. It is this which has led to lot of social distortions. But here you would see that whenever a religious issue comes, some of the sections on the basis of caste would also be part of this religious identity politics, and they would also be part of social identity politics. Given this overlapping nature, both were balancing and counterbalancing each other, because of which the democratic stability in India continued. It is this unstable democracy, unstable society did not emerge because of this balancing and counterbalancing arrangement that you see within Indian society. Moreover, as these two emerge and as these two rule the Indian politics through the identity politics, it is creating this issue of democratic accountability. Any political party, when it announces its manifesto, if it is based on this identity politics, then it must also have certain democratic accountability. What is the way forward in order to address such concerns? One is, as Ambedkar has suggested, through the reform of social institutions such as marriage, there has to be annihilation of the structural distortions such as caste. Then the possibility of even religious identity-based politics would also decline. Second, there has to be strengthening of political and social institutions. The social institutions such as marriage and the political institutions such as the governing structures must be strengthened in such a way that caste becomes redundant and religion becomes redundant within the politics of the Indian society. Third, in order to achieve both of these, as it has been recommended by number of committees, including Balwant Rai Mehta committee, that grassroots level democracy must be strengthened. The 29 subjects which are mentioned in the 11th schedule must be thoroughly transferred to these grassroots level governing institutions such that they behave as true local governments, and these true local governments through dynamic democratic politics would also address such identity politics within India. It is in this particular context, this award which has been posthumously conferred upon Karpuri Prasad must be understood. Having completed the discussion over the articles, we shall now move to certain practice questions. Take this prelims question. Consider the following statements. The first statement is, Design Linked Incentive Scheme has been announced by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, which is a false statement. The scheme provides only financial incentives to semiconductor designing startups. No, it's also a false statement. One of the key provisions is the 3-year domestic status maintenance requirement and restrictions on FDI for beneficiary startups, which is a correct statement. We have to identify what are the statements which are not correct, and hence we know that it is 1 and 2 only. Move to this second question. Consider the following statements. In the context of security order in Europe, Helsinki Final Act signed in 1975 is with respect to security cooperation in Europe. We have discussed that it is one law which is referring to the security cooperation in Europe, and hence it is correct statement. The Warsaw Pact was a collective defense treaty established by the Soviet Union and other Soviet satellite states in Central and Eastern Europe, which is also a correct statement, and hence answer has to be C. Moving to the third question. Consider the following statements. Rights are privileges of few citizens against the many, which is a false statement. Right against torture is inherent and encompassed within the right to life, which is a correct statement, and hence answer has to be 2 only. Moving to the fourth question. Direct taxes in India are characterized by their 1. Incidence falling on the final consumer, progressive nature with rates increasing as income rises, levying on goods and services, and dependence on the volume of transactions. Answer has to be B, because direct taxes are progressive in nature as these incomes are increasing because of the different slabs that we have. Moving to the fifth question. Consider the following statements. Higher tax to GDP ratio generally strengthens the fiscal outlook of the nation, which is a correct statement. Recently seen higher tax buoyancy can be attributed to the increasing tax base, which is also a correct statement. Hence, answer has to be C. Now, we shall move to the mains practice question. Take this particular question. Discuss the key challenges faced by Indian society due to identity politics based on caste and religion. For this particular question, you can write an introduction where you can briefly introduce the constitutional provisions that guarantee the right to equality and freedom of religion in India. We are mentioning about right to equality because it takes away the possibilities of implementation of caste as a rigid structure within Indian society. In the body, you can discuss about the nature of such protection transitioning into identity politics based on religion as an emotive factor and caste as a structural social factor within the society. Now, we can dwell upon the nature of the emergence of the processes such as the Mandir Mandal issue, where its recurrence can also be seen in the contemporary times of construction of Mandir and the demand for the socio-economic caste census that the opposition is making in contemporary times. At the conclusion, you can say that the measures of reducing such structural rigidities, the measures of addressing this religion as an emotive factor in the electoral politics can be considered, can be written, and then the substantial, consequent, necessary institutional changes which have to be made in order to implement this, including the strengthening of the grassroots level democracy must also be written. This concludes this session of DNA for today. If you like this initiative, please like, share and comment on the video, and don't forget to subscribe our channel. Thank you one and all. Have a good day.